The topic for today, we have two topics. The first one is motivation, and the second one is emotion. The topics for today is quite different from those topics we discussed in the first half of the semester. In the previous weeks, we talked about memory, perception, those kind of stuff. Basically, in all of those topics, we treat human beings as machines. Okay. But from today onward, we are going to treat human beings as human beings. Okay. So before we go into the core of motivation, this is the chart I have to repetitively shown you for a few times. What do we psychologists do? Psychologists, we look at human behavior. Okay. So this is the data we collect. We collect human behavior. But we are really interested in is not the behavior itself. We are interested in knowing what is the reasons for those behavior. The physiology is important because we need the nervous system to implement the behavior. Okay? And this is relatively easier to solve because we have a lot of machines, we have a lot of devices which can help us understand the relationship between the nervous system and the behavior. But even we know the functions of our physiology, we still don't know what is the cause of the nervous the neural activities. And this is relatively harder to solve. This relationship between nervous system and behavior and genes, environment, and free will, actually their relationship is a little bit like if you have ever written a program, okay, a computer program. For example, you want to write a program to do addition. Okay. So the function of addition is like a human behavior, and to run a program, you need a computer to run this program. That computer is just like our human physiology, because you can imagine if there is no computer, even you have the program, you can't run that program. Or if you have the program, but your computer doesn't have enough battery, so it is off. You can't still run that program. So physiology is important, just like a computer itself is important for running a program. But in the case of computer program, you are the computer programmer. But in the case of human behavior, we don't know who the programmer is. It could be the genes, it could be the environment, it could be free will. We still don't know what is the cause, or they all could be the cause. And how they interact, we still don't know. Okay. So human behavior, when you look at the term human behavior, actually it includes many different kinds of behavior. It could be language. Language is a human behavior. It could be thinking. It could be interpersonal interaction. It could be perception, memory, intelligence, abnormal behavior, attention, decision making, reasoning, creativity, and emotion, motivation. These are all human behaviors. And in the first half of this semester, we have covered the left side of the human behaviors. And if you look at these behaviors, how many of them do you think could be replaced by artificial intelligence? 人工智慧, artificial intelligence. Or to make it easier, how many of them do you think could be replaced by robots, potentially? Does anyone want to give your opinion, express your opinion? How many of these behaviors could potentially be replaced by robots or by machines? What about memory? Supposedly memory could be replaced by computer because any computer supposedly has much stronger memory capacity than you do. So of memory, potentially, could be replaced by artificial intelligence. What about like language? Although language or artificial language, or to make it even more relevant to your everyday life, like Google Translate. I believe that many of the people here have ever used Google Translate. Of course, it's not perfect. If you put any sentences in any language into Google Translate, if you wanted to translate, the translation result could be quite weird. But it's getting better now. And probably in a few years, in a few decades, it will become almost perfect. Up to a point, you can't really distinguish whether it's translated by a machine or translated by a real person. So although it's not perfect, but potentially it could become almost perfect in the future. Okay. Basically, all those human behaviors on the left side, or like perception, vision, audition, those kind of stuff. For vision, probably it's also not that perfect, but it's getting better now. If you want the machine to recognize a human face, like Facebook, if you have a Facebook account, sometimes when you post a picture, and sometimes the Facebook will recognize that person on its own. Sometimes, although it's not perfect, but it's getting better now. And probably in the future, it will become almost perfect, almost like a real human being. Okay. Basically, all those human behaviors on the left side, someday, somehow, they could be replaced by machines or by robots. But what about those behaviors on the right side, like emotion, motivation, okay? Emotion, happiness, sadness, those kind of stuff. Probably it's really hard to imagine a robot could feel happy or could feel sad. Or if you want to make a robot, probably you wouldn't want this robot to have emotions. You just want the robot to do whatever you do. Okay. What about motivation? What is motivation? 动机哦. Motivation is why you want to do a particular thing. Why you want to eat? Why you want to have sex? Why you want to get higher grades? Why you want to earn more money? Why you want to reproduce? Why you want to survive? Those desires to do a particular thing is motivation. When you make a machine, when you make a robot, probably you wouldn't want a robot to have motivation. You just want the robot to do whatever you want it to do. So all those behaviors on the right side, probably you wouldn't want a robot to have these behaviors. Okay. And those behaviors, motivation and emotions, are something we are going to talk about today. Okay. So before we go into the contents, the details of motivation, let's think about something about artificial intelligence or robot. Some people, they have some worries about developing artificial intelligence because they worry that maybe it will decrease the employment rate, which is to increase the unemployment rate. Because if those tasks could be done by a robot, then they probably don't need that human labor. So people will lose their jobs because of development of artificial intelligence. It could be a potential concern, but maybe it's not too hard to solve. Another concern that people are more worried about is, would it be possible that robots will replace humans? Or will those robots kill human beings, okay, to reproduce themselves? You can see this kind of scenario in many movies and novels, that you develop a super intelligent robot, eventually the robot would want to reproduce themselves, and then they will kill all the human beings. You can see this kind of scenario that robots will kill humans. Actually, somehow it's a projection of human themselves, because even you could create a super intelligent robot, why does this robot want to kill you? I mean, this is something you can think about. Why do you think a super intelligent creature will kill the other creature? Actually, there's no necessary reason. When some species or when some machine, when some robot, when it gets super intelligence, it doesn't mean that they will want to kill others. The reason why some people, they would expect that a super intelligent robot would kill other people is because somehow they project their own human desires, their own human nature on those robots. Because probably, this is just hypothesis, probably deep in our mind as a human being, we all have that kind of very evil nature that once we are better, once we become more superior than another species, we would want to kind of erase them. Okay, probably this is some kinds of human evil nature. So you just project, or those readers, those audience of those movies, they project their own human nature, their own evil human nature onto those robots. Because a super intelligent robot doesn't necessarily mean that they would want to kill human beings. Okay? Does it make sense? So this is why high cognitive function don't necessarily come with high reproduction or high survival motivation. As a human being, because we have those motivations, we have the motivations of reproduce, we have motivation of survive. And usually when we see another species is progressing or is evolving, we tend to feel worried that they will replace us. So we have the tendency to somehow maybe kill other species. And when we are developing those artificial intelligence, or when we are developing those robots, we unconsciously probably project our own nature onto them. So that's why you can see that in many novels or movies, you can see a scenario, a storyline, something like a super intelligent robot, they will kind of kill or erase the whole human beings. Okay? But actually, cognitive functions, to be intelligent, to have high memory capacity, to have high computational capacity, it doesn't necessarily mean that you would want to reproduce or you would want to survive. Okay? To survive or to reproduce, they are both our human natures, and they could have nothing to do with the cognition. And we are talking about them today. Okay? We are going to talk about why do humans have these human natures, like why do we want to eat, or why do we want to have sex? Okay. So let's start with, actually, in addition to eating and sex, we also have other motivations. For example, we all want to be better than other people. We all have the motivation of achievement. We all want to achieve something. We all want to accomplish something. Okay? But we are not talking about those high-level motivations today because they are far more too complex. We are talking about those more primitive, easier, the motivations today, which are eating and sex. So why do we want to eat and why do we want to have sex? Okay? So eating, why do we want to eat? Okay. Some people may think that, of course, we need to eat because our body needs nutrition. So we eat because we have to survive. It could be right, but it is not the whole picture of eating behavior. Because if you want to you can think about why you eat. Sometimes we eat not because our body needs nutrition. Sometimes you just eat for pleasure. Sometimes you just eat for nothing. Sometimes you eat because of social reasons. So we eat for various reasons. Okay? To survive is one of the reasons, but it's not the whole reason. We also eat for other reasons. But still, when people think about eating, people still think about the reason why we eat because our body needs nutrition, particularly our digestive system. And what is our digestive system? Our stomach. The reason why we eat because our stomach is empty, or like this group of researchers, they hypothesized that the reason why we want to eat is because our stomach contracts. When our stomach contracts, we would have the desire to eat something. This is a hypothesis. And to test this hypothesis, these two people, actually they did something very extreme. This person, Washburn, he swallowed a balloon. He swallowed something into his stomach. And why did he swallow this balloon? Because he can measure the pressure inside of the stomach by the balloon. So he swallowed this balloon and he measures the pressure inside of his stomach. And he found there was a correlation between the pressure, the air pressure inside of the stomach and how hungry he was. So because of this piece of evidence, this group suggested, why do we want to eat? Because our stomach contracts. Whenever our stomach contracts, then we will have the feeling of hunger. Okay. But some more later study also showed that stomach movement is not the only reason for hunger. We feel hungry also because of other reasons. For example, they found that if you inject the sugar into bloodstream, okay, that can reduce stomach contraction. So when the person, his bloodstream has enough sugar, the stomach doesn't contract, but he still feels hungry, which means that stomach contraction itself doesn't explain why we feel hungry. There is still some other factors that governs our hunger. Okay. Like this. If we look at the central nervous system, what is the central nervous system? The central nervous system comprises our brain and the spinal cord, particularly the brain. There is a structure in our brain called hypothalamus. 下视丘, hypothalamus. And hypothalamus has something to do with our eating behavior. Inside of the structure of hypothalamus, there are several substructures, several smaller structures. One of them is called lateral hypothalamus, or sometimes we just call it LH. LH, we have found that on rats, if you destroy the LH, lateral hypothalamus, okay, then this rat doesn't feel hunger anymore. Okay? Or it will lead to less consumption of food. So probably LH is the structure that initiates the feeling of hunger. Okay? LH. Lateral 是旁侧的意思, lateral hypothalamus. But there is another structure, ventral medial hypothalamus. Okay? It's another region inside of our hypothalamus. It controls the satiety. And what is satiety? When you eat up to a point, you will stop eating because you feel full. That kind of feeling of full is controlled by VMH, ventral medial hypothalamus. The reason why we found VMH is relevant to satiety because if you destroy the VMH of a rat, then the rat will keep eating. It can't stop it. So eating behavior, although we just say eating, actually it involves two different kinds of mechanisms. One of them is hunger. The other one is satiety. And they are controlled by different structures. So why do we want to eat? Why do we want to stop eating? The stomach itself can't explain everything. You still have to include brain as part of this system. But it is also not everything. Because some recent studies also found that although VMH is considered to be the satiety center, but if you damage VMH, the rat will keep eating, okay? But only for the food that tastes good. The rat will keep eating food that the rat feels tasty, but for some other food, the rat doesn't eat it. So VMH itself can't completely explain why we or why rats stop eating. There is some other factors that control the satiety. Okay. This is also one of the factors that controls our eating behavior, glucose, 葡萄糖哦. If the glucose level in the bloodstream is low, then there are some cells in our liver, 肝脏, that it will send signal to LH. So if the glucose is low, then the liver, some cells in the liver will detect the low level of glucose and it will send signals to LH, telling LH to initiate the feeling of hunger. Okay. Another thing, leptin. Leptin is a hormone and it inhibits eating. So if you have any problem with your leptin, then you keep eating. So why do we eat? Why do we stop eating? Actually, it involves many different kinds of structures in our body. Our brain, thalamus, the stomach, because whenever it contracts, you feel hungry, and the sugar level in your blood, and your liver, and your leptin, they all are relevant to our eating behavior. So if we go back to this picture, why do we eat or why do we stop eating? LH, VMH, leptin, and some other factors, they are all potential factors. So they are physiology. What about something behind the physiology? Can we find any genes or environmental factors that can control the eating behavior? Okay. For genes, we have identified a kind of gene that can control the production of leptin. Okay. So yes, gene is important because gene can control the leptin level, which can inhibit our eating. So genes are important. What about environment? When we are talking about sugar level in the bloodstream, where does the sugar come from? The sugar comes from the outside. So the sugar level is the environment. Okay. What about free will? Is there anything that can't be explained by genes or environment? Probably. Okay. There is a study which I think is quite interesting because in this study, basically they classified people into two kinds of people. One of them is called restrained eaters. With restraint, somehow it means to control, to suppress. So those eaters, they are restrained, which means that they don't eat according to their feeling. They eat according to their calculation. Whenever they are eating, they actually are calculating the calories that food has. So they will set a limit. Whenever you increase this calorie, probably they will stop eating. Whenever you haven't reached this calorie, probably they'll keep eating. So actually they are calculating whenever they are eating. These people, according to this research, they call them restrained eaters. Okay. So in contrast to restrained eaters, the other kind of eaters are unrestrained eaters. So unrestrained eaters are people who eat whenever they feel hungry. They just eat according to their feeling. Okay. Probably you would think that restrained eaters, they can maintain their weight better than unrestrained eaters. But there was one study, they tried to investigate the eating behavior between unrestrained eater and restrained eaters. And this is what they did. It's an experiment. And so they recruited a group of subjects. And before they came into the lab, they had to do some questionnaire which can help the researcher to classify them into either unrestrained eaters or restrained eaters. Okay. So they could be unrestrained eaters or restrained eaters. They could be eaters who eat according to their feeling or eaters who eat according to their calculation. Okay. And in this experiment, they were told to eat a slice of pizza. And it's an experiment, so you have to manipulate something. So they have two groups, larger group and smaller group. The larger group is that those subjects, they were told that their pizza, their slice is bigger than other people's. And in the smaller group, those subjects, they were told that their pizza is smaller than other people's, but in fact, they eat exactly the same size of pizza. The only thing different is how they were told. Half of the people, they were told your pizza is bigger than other people's pizza, and the other half is told that your pizza is smaller than other people's pizza. Okay? But in fact, they are exactly the same. So after they have eaten the pizza, they were told that, okay, now there are chocolate cookies in the lab. You can eat as much as you can. Okay, so this is the result, which is tricky, because if you look at unrestrained eaters, they eat according to their feeling. Okay, they don't calculate. If you look at how much cookies they eat, okay, for smaller slice, which means that they were told that their pizza is smaller than the other people's, and after they have eaten the pizza, the quantity of the chocolate cookies they ate is about 60. Okay, it's just a unit. This is the quantity they eat. But if you told them that your pizza is larger than other people's and they eat slightly less, but the difference doesn't reach significance, they are slightly different but not significantly different, okay? Which makes sense, because for those eaters, no matter which group they were in, could be slices, a smaller slice or a larger slice, the actual size they ate was exactly the same. So it makes sense that the chocolates they ate after eating the pizza were not too much different. Okay. But the tricky thing is, if you look at the behavior of restrained eaters, who are people, whenever they eat, they are actually calculating the calorie. If you tell them that your pizza is smaller than other people's, then this is the amount they ate. But if you told them that your pizza is actually larger than other people's, they turn out they ate more. Okay. This is counterintuitive, because supposedly because they are restrained eaters, so supposedly they should be calculating whenever they are eating. So supposedly, if they know that their pizza has been larger than other people's, they should eat less cookies afterward. But this data suggests that no, eventually they ate more. So this is the data. Okay. The next thing is, how do you explain the data? Okay. The mechanism these studies they use to explain the data is, for restrained eaters, yes, they are calculating whenever they are eating, but your brain is not always free. Your brain is always busy, because in our real life we have many things to do. You have your job to work on, you have your family to work with, and you can't really calculate how much you eat all the times. So sometimes when you are stressed, or sometimes when you are preoccupied by other things, then you don't have enough effort to calculate, and the consequence is you would be disinhibited. Okay? This phenomenon, they call it disinhibition. Those people, they calculate all the time, but whenever they suffer from any stress, or they are preoccupied by some other things, then they don't have enough effort, enough brain power to calculate their eating, and the consequence is they will turn out eat more. Okay, so if you look at their weight, actually you can find a paradox. 矛盾的地方, a paradox. This paradox is, you can find many overweight people. They are actually, restrained eaters. They actually are calculating all the times. But just as what I said, when you are trying to control something, usually the consequence is not something you would expect. You can imagine that for us, for human beings, like breathing is important because we need air, we need oxygen to survive. That's why we can't really control our breathing. Our breathing is actually controlled by our brainstem, which can't be controlled by our consciousness. Because you can imagine if we need our consciousness to control our breathing, it could be dangerous. What would happen if you forgot to breathe? Then you would die. Actually, very similar logic can somehow apply on eating. For some people, they don't really eat according to their feeling. They just eat according to their brain. In that case, because you still have your other stuff to do, you can't really concentrate on eating all the times. So if you always use your brain when you are eating, then what if you are stressed? What if you forgot to control? Then the consequence is you will turn out eat more than you are supposed to eat. And it's actually a risky factor for overweight. Okay. So this is something interesting about eating behavior. But no matter what kind of eaters you are, restrained eaters or unrestrained eater, basically they are all within the normal population. There are some other people, their eating behavior is far more eccentric, far more strange, far more abnormal. Okay? And we're going to talk about 3 of them. The first one, anorexia nervosa, 厌食症 bulimia nervosa, or binge eating disorder. Okay? What is anorexia nervosa? 厌食症 If you look at the actual behavior of those patients with anorexia nervosa, many of them have the symptom of body dissatisfaction. What is body dissatisfaction? Just like this. If you look at the girl in this picture, she is skinny, but whenever she looks at the mirror, she always feels that she's a fat woman. This is body dissatisfaction. In most of the cases, they are not fat, they are not overweight, but they always think that they are overweight. And they usually associate overweight with something negative. A few weeks ago, when we talked about classical conditioning and operational conditioning, I tried to use this as an example, because there could be potentially many reasons for anorexia nervosa, but one of the reasons for anorexia nervosa is those patients, they associate like overweight or obesity with something negative. At the same time, they also associate fat with food. So eventually they will associate food with something negative. So whenever they see food, they always have negative feelings. So and eventually they would avoid touching or eating food. And it could be dangerous because we are still a human being. We are a biological entity. We need nutrition to survive. If you have negative or aversive feelings for food, it could be fatal. It could affect your life. You could die. Like people could die because of anorexia nervosa. So that is anorexia nervosa. But in addition to this, there are some other eating disorders like this bulimia nervosa. These people, they also have issues with food. They also have issues with getting fat, but they still want to eat. So what they do is they eat, but they will try to vomit after they eat. Bulimia nervosa. And they induce the vomiting by themselves. Okay. Binge eating is the other extreme of anorexia nervosa. Those people, they just eat endlessly. And why? Potentially there could be many reasons, but a crucial reason, the crucial factor for binge eating is, for those people, they usually feel better whenever they eat, after they have eaten something. So when they feel stressed, they deal with their stress by eating, because after eating of something, then they would feel not that stressed. Okay, so the consequence, they would develop binge eating disorder. Okay, for anorexia nervosa, probably a few decades ago, it was a very female dominant disorder. Okay, because you can find most of the patients, they were female. But nowadays, the gender difference is decreasing. There are still some, there are increasing numbers of male patients. Okay, like the picture on the right. Those people, those men, if you look at this picture, they have been quite fit already. But by looking at the mirror, they still think that they are overweight, just like the female version of anorexia nervosa. On the left, it's actually another kind of eating disorder, and which is relatively new, because those people, particularly in men, okay, probably they want to gain muscles, so they work out a lot and they take in a lot of protein supplements. They always want to get big. So, and the consequence is, no matter how big they become, no matter how much protein supplements, no matter how much food they eat, by looking at the mirror, they still think they are skinny. Okay, so usually the symptom is they will keep eating a lot, up to a point it feels like binge eating. So that was eating behavior. Okay. The next, we are talking about something relevant to human survival. Okay. Sexual behavior. Looking at this picture. Okay. So what do psychologists do? We look at human behavior, we try to look for the physiological basis of those behavior, and we try to look for the genetic or environmental factor that affects the nervous system. With sexual behavior, actually sexual behavior includes many different kinds of behaviors. If you focus on sexual desire, why do you want to have sex? There are potentially many factors that determine our sexual desire. Okay, it could be testosterone. Testosterone is male sex hormone, 男性荷尔蒙, for men and for women. Okay. And there are also there could be some other genetic factors or environmental factors, or we don't know whether free will exists. Okay. For environment, if you look at other animals, environmental factors are important, particularly pheromones. Pheromones are chemicals that an animal generates or creates to attract another animal. Okay. For human beings, we also produce pheromones, but it seems that we don't really use pheromones to attract another person. The reason is, if you think about any kind of dating scenario, usually before someone goes on a date, usually what he or she does before the date is to take a shower, which is to get rid of the pheromone you have in your body. So actually for human beings, we seem to adopt an opposite strategy from other animals. So probably pheromones can't really explain our sexual behavior that well. Okay, there are something others. Testosterone. There is a correlation between the levels of testosterone and a person's sexual desire, both for men and for women. Because although it's called testosterone, but in women's body also produce testosterone as well. There is a correlation between the level of testosterone and how much you want to have sex. Okay. But it's just a correlation. And also, there have been some cases where for men who have surgical castration, okay, surgical castration means they get their sexual organ removed. So those men, they don't have testicles, which means they don't produce testosterone. For women produce testosterone, but for men, if you don't have testicles, then you don't have testosterone. Even for those men who don't have testicles, who don't have testosterone in their blood, they still report that they want to have sex, which means that testosterone can't completely explain human sexual desire as well. There are still some other factors. So it seems quite complicated. There are potentially many different kinds of reasons that governs our sexual behavior. Okay. Genes. Is there anything that could be relevant to our genes that can control sexual desire? Speaking of genes, if you want to look at the genetic codes, probably it could be too complicated. So maybe we should try another way to look at the effect of genes. We try to look at evolution, 演化. Evolutionarily, male and females, men and women, seem to adopt different strategies to reproduce themselves. For men, if you look at evolution, because to reproduce a child for men probably is not that, because a man doesn't really need to invest too much time to raise a child in terms of evolutionary speaking. So probably for men, the best strategy is to disseminate as much as possible, to spread his DNA as much as possible. It's the best strategy for men. For women, because women need more energy, more time to raise a child or to be pregnant with a child. So probably the best strategy is not to have too much or too many potential sexual partners. Probably is to find the best one. Okay, this is from evolution, and this also probably kind of consistent of our common sense. But this is psychology. Although sometimes you want to claim some common sense, you still have to provide evidence to support those so-called common sense. Is there any evidence? There is one study. Okay. This study, they recruited many participants among 52 nations. They want to control the cultural difference, so they recruited subjects from different countries. They use questionnaires, okay, and trying to investigate the mating or sex strategy that men and women have. They classify those strategies into two kinds, short-term and long-term. Short-term speaking, for a man, a best strategy in the short term is to seduce and abandon as many women as possible. Okay, and for female, the short-term strategy is to find the best man or the alpha male of a group. Short-term is something about you just want to reproduce a child. This is short-term. For long-term, it's not only reproducing a child. You are still concerned with how much energy or how well you can raise a child. The child's development is also important. Then that kind of strategy is long-term strategy. So with long-term strategy for men, probably it would be better to be committed to a female. And for a female, the long-term best strategy probably is not find the best man. Probably it is better to find a loyal one, so who can be committed to you, so who can help you raise your child. Okay, and they compare what kind of strategies that men and women use across these 52 nations, and they found a tendency that men consistently across different nations, okay, consistently report greater desire. But of course, there are individual differences. But if you just compare the statistical result, men have a tendency to adopt the short-term strategy, okay, to seduce and to abandon as many women as possible. For women, they are more inclined to adopt a long-term strategy, which is to find a loyal one instead of the best one. Okay, so it seems that this kind of, when you think about the mating strategy a man and a woman uses, probably this data can suggest something relevant to evolution. So that was the strategic difference between the two sexes. But the story is actually more complicated for women because women have menstrual cycle. Okay? And actually it's interesting that for other animals, their sexual behavior, particularly on the female individuals, their sexual behavior is highly affected by their menstrual cycle. But for human beings, actually, it is for women, they are not that as affected as by menstrual cycle as other animals. But the menstrual cycles still play a role in some subtle things like this. According to this research, they found something interesting. They just recruited a group of women, and of course they investigate their which stage in the menstrual cycle they were at. Okay, and what those women did was they were shown a group of men's pictures, and those women they had to identify whether those men were homosexual or heterosexual, okay, gay or straight, and they found during the ovulation stage, 排卵期 actually they are more accurate in judging a man's sexuality. Okay, so this is what they found. Anyway, so now we are talking about homosexuality, so which leads to our next topic, homosexuality. Because for sexual behavior, if you look at sexual behavior, the majority is if an individual is a man, then it is more likely the man would be attracted to a woman. If this individual is a woman, then it is more likely that this woman will be attracted to a man. That is the majority. But it doesn't mean that everyone follows that rule, because there are still a significant numbers of people who are attracted to either the same sex or attracted to both sexes. If you look at the statistics, actually there have been many statistical reports. Okay? And one of the earliest one is done by Alfred Kinsey, 金赛博士了哈. But this one is relatively earlier, and it was done in the Western world, Europe and America. And according to his study, 37% of men reported that they had homosexual experience, and 4% of them they claimed that they were exclusively homosexual. And another more recent study, they found that 3.2% of men and 2.5% of women, they reported they had same-sex activity in the previous year. But for this kind of studies, because this is a difficulty, the intrinsic difficulty for this kind of study is actually there is no objective way to measure a person's sexuality. Nowadays, the only way you can know a person's sexuality is to ask him or her directly. No other better way. So those statistics, it's really hard to identify, really hard to confirm how real they are, because some people, they might not report their true identity when they are doing this questionnaire. But there's no other better way. Okay? So if you look at this statistic, usually those figures are underestimated. Okay. Homosexuality, if you look at those statistics, chances are they are underestimated, because some people, although maybe in fact they are homosexual, but probably they wouldn't really tell you. And this is also the difficulty that this is also a difficulty that you have to face when you want to do any investigation on homosexuality. But actually, if you think about homosexuality, this word itself is a little bit, how to say, a bit chauvinist, because if you look at the word homosexuality, basically it assumes that heterosexuality is the normal situation. So homo is the special case of sexuality. But if you think about homosexuality from a scientific perspective, actually we don't even know, like in science, in psychology or in neuroscience, we don't even know the cause of sexuality. Okay? Although most people are attracted to the opposite sex, and some people they are attracted to the same sex, But we still don't know, even for the majority, why are they attracted to the opposite sex? We don't even know the reason for heterosexuality. So maybe we should modify the question from homosexuality into sexuality, because we don't even know why are some people attracted to men, why are some people attracted to women, why are some people attracted to both sexes, and why are some people they are actually attracted to neither sex. Some people, they start to wonder, in terms of sexuality, it is more determined by nature or nurture. Nature means genes. Nurture means the environment. Okay? So if you want to know whether sexuality is determined by nature or nurture, what could you do to address this issue? Okay? A few weeks ago, when we talked about intelligence, we touched this issue for the first time. Okay? Because if you want to know whether intelligence is determined by genes or by the environment, people would use a method. Okay? The same method is also used in the issue of sexuality. Does anyone remember this? What is the method that we can use to study nature and nurture? If you want to know a particular trait is determined more by the genes or by the environment, which technique could you use? For example, if you want to know whether the environment is important, supposedly you have to find two groups of people. They have exactly the same genes, and the only thing different is their environment, and you compare their performance difference. If you find that people share the same environment, they are more similar than the other group where people don't share the same environment, then probably you can say environment is important. So how could you find people with exactly the same genes, twins, identical twins? You can compare twins, identical twins. They are raised together or they are raised separately. And if you find they are very different, then you can say environment is important. Okay. So this is twin study. So if you want to know whether genetic information is important, okay, and you have to compare the two groups, identical twins reared together and fraternal twins. Fraternal twins, 异卵双生, they are also twins, but they only share 50% of genetic similarity. Genetically, they are just the same as other siblings. The only thing they are special is the two individuals, they just happen to be conceived at the same time in the same uterus, but genetically they are just normal siblings. If you compare the two, okay, because the genetic similarity for identical twins is 100%, for fraternal twins is 50%. In terms of environment similarity, because in both of the two cases, they were both rare together. So if you find higher similarity for the first group, then probably you can say genes are important. Because the only thing different between the two groups is the genetic similarity. But if you want to know whether the environment is important, then you have to compare the first two. Because for identical twins and reared together and identical twins reared separately, in terms of genetic similarity, they're all 100%. The only thing different is their environmental similarity. In the first case, it's higher. In the second case, it's lower. So if you find that the first group are more similar than the second group, then probably you can say that environment is important. Okay. This is the logic. So if we look at homo or heterosexuality, okay, there have been many studies investigating this issue, and this is just one of them. Okay. They recruited 750 pairs of twins, and they found that for identical twins, 32% of them are concordant. Concordant, their definition of concordant is when one is gay, probably this one is too simplified. Their definition is when one is non-heterosexual, the probability of the other one being non-heterosexual. When I say non-heterosexual, it means that it could be gay, it could be bisexual. They all are included in non-heterosexual. So for identical twins, if one individual is non-heterosexual, then there is 32% of likelihood that the other one is also non-heterosexual. This figure is significantly higher than this one, fraternal twins. Okay. For fraternal twins, they are also, okay, the only thing different between a pair of identical twins and a pair of fraternal twins is this genetic similarity is 100%. For this one, the genetic similarity is 50%. And this difference of genetic similarity could cause a drop of concordancy. Okay. So for fraternal twins, if one is non-heterosexual, there is only 8% of the likelihood that the other one is also non-heterosexual, which is much significantly lower than identical twins. Which also means that genes are important. But although genes are important, it's not 100% important, because if you look at this number here, if one individual of the twins is non-heterosexual, the other one being heterosexual, the likelihood of this is not 100%. It is 32%, which is higher than 8, but it's still much less than 100%. Somehow also means that genes are important, but it's not 100% important. There are also some other factors that determine whether you are heterosexual or homosexual. Okay. So this issue is complicated. If this is too complicated, if it is too hard to investigate the relationship between the genes or environment, can we find something easier? So there are some other people, they don't look at the genes, they look at the brain. Because in a way, brain is a product of genes and environment. So would it be easier if we just look directly into the brain? There is one study published in 2008. They look at the symmetry of different kinds of people. Okay? They found that for heterosexual men and homosexual women, which means they are attracted to women. If you compare the symmetry between their left and their right brain, there is a tendency that the right brain seems to be larger than the left brain. But if you look at the other group, homosexual men and heterosexual women, which means that they are attracted to men, and their two brains seem to be more symmetrical. Okay? But this is just a correlational study. You don't know which one is the cause and which one is the effect. There is also another theory proposed by Daryl Bain. According to this theory, exotic becomes erotic. Exotic means something different, particularly something different from you. When you feel something with someone very different, then you tend to develop erotic or romantic feelings for him or her. So why are some people attracted to men and some other people attracted to women? The reason is no matter which sex they are, they are just attracted to people who have different temperaments from theirs. But temperament, 气质, temperament is biological determined. Some people they have more masculine temperament, and some people they have more like feminine temperament, and it is probably determined by the nature. But and once you develop this temperament, then you tend to be attracted to people who have the opposite temperament from you. Okay. So this is according to his theory. But anyway, genes or environment, which one is more important? And this is not the first time we touch this issue. Okay. Probably this issue itself is not a very well-defined issue, because whenever you want to compare the two things, usually it will be easier to compare if the two things are really separate. But in the case of genes and environment, it is really hard to separate the two, because they have interactions. Your genes will determine which environment to choose. Probably your genes determine your temperament, and your temperament will affect what kind of environment you choose. And then your environment somehow can affect, because for human beings, our genetic information is abundant, and not every one of them is expressed out. Some of the genes are expressed, and some of the genes are not expressed. And probably the environment could be a factor to determine which genes to express and which genes not to express. So environment and genes, there are interactions. So it's really hard to separate the two. So if you want to really know intelligence, homosexuality, or in a few weeks we're going to talk about some psychological disorder like schizophrenia. If you really want to know genes in environment, which one is important, probably you will never get a conclusive answer, because you will always find that both factors are important, and neither of them is 100% important. They are both important, but both of them are not, neither of them is 100%. But in any case, in terms of psychiatry and clinical psychology, basically we don't take homosexuality as some kinds of disorder, because before the 1970s, these two major organizations around the world, although it's American, but basically it's used around the world. Before the 1970s, yes, of course, homosexuality was considered abnormal, but from 1970s onward up to now, in clinical psychology or in psychiatry, homosexuality is not abnormal. It's just one feature of a human being. Okay. So, yeah, homosexuality has been removed from the list of psychological disorders. Okay. Originally, I wanted to show you a video about the relationship between genes and environment, but we don't have time. So if you're interested, you can watch on your own. Okay. But in any case, what I want to emphasize here is, if you still remember a few weeks ago or in the beginning of the semester when we talked about color vision, there was one important message I wanted to emphasize back then was, when you look at something red, okay, and when another person is looking at the same thing, he also calls it red, but you will never know whether you too see the same red, although you both call it red. Okay. So maybe we see different colors, but you would never know what other people will see unless you become the other person. The same logic also applies on like sexuality. You are attracted to a particular person or a particular sex. It doesn't mean that the other people have to be attracted by them as well, because unless you become another person, otherwise you will never understand how the other person would feel. Okay. Even for two individuals, if there are two people, they are both attracted to men, for example, maybe their feelings are different. So unless you become another person, otherwise there's no way you can understand or you can how another person feels. So probably a better strategy is just to respect people as they are. And probably whether sexuality is determined by nature or nurture probably is not that important. Okay.